You are sitting somewhere right now, and you cannot remember learning to sit. You cannot remember the first time you heard your own name. You cannot remember the faces leaning over you in those first weeks, the voices that shaped every sound you would ever make. The earliest years of your life, the ones that formed you more than any other, are simply gone. Not blurry, not faded, gone. And that is one of the strangest things about being human. Psychologists call it childhood amnesia. Some call it infantile amnesia. But the name does not explain the mystery, because you were not unconscious during those years. You were awake, you were learning, you were forming attachments so powerful they would define your entire emotional life. And yet your brain chose to erase all of it. Why? The answer pulls you back millions of years, and when you understand it, the way you think about memory and about yourself will never quite be the same. Your first instinct might be that babies simply do not have the hardware to store memories, that the brain is too undeveloped, too soft, too new, and that is partially true, but it is not the full answer, because infants do form memories. Research has confirmed this. Babies as young as 6 months can remember a face they saw only once. They can remember a sequence of actions performed in front of them and reproduce it days later. The memory is there. It is working. It is recording. So the question is not whether memories are formed, the question is why they disappear. In the 1980s, a researcher named Pillemer and a colleague named White began mapping the earliest memories adults could reliably recall. What they found was a consistent gap. Almost no one could retrieve a genuine autobiographical memory from before the age of 2. Most people's earliest clear memory sat somewhere between age 3 and 3.5, and memories before age 7 were sparse, fragmented, and often contaminated by photographs, stories told by parents, or things heard rather than experienced. You think you remember your 3rd birthday, but do you? Or do you remember a photograph of your 3rd birthday that you have looked at so many times it rewrote itself into experience? The brain is not a camera, it is a storyteller, and it edits constantly. One major piece of the puzzle comes from a structure deep inside your brain called the hippocampus. This curved, seahorse-shaped region is the primary architect of long-term autobiographical memory. It does not store memories itself. Instead, it acts as a coordinator, binding together information from different sensory regions into a single coherent experience that can be retrieved later as a unified story. But here is the problem. The hippocampus is one of the last regions of the brain to fully mature. In the first years of life, it is still being constructed. New neurons are being born at an extraordinary rate, a process called neurogenesis, and this rapid growth is actually what destroys early memories. New neurons integrate themselves into existing circuits and disrupt the connections that stored the original experience. The very act of your brain growing is what erases your past. A researcher named Paul Franklin at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto demonstrated this directly. In studies with young mice, he found that high rates of neurogenesis in the hippocampus correlated directly with faster forgetting. When he slowed down neurogenesis in infant mice, they retained memories longer. When he artificially increased neurogenesis in adult mice, they began to forget at rates similar to infants. Your early childhood was not deleted by accident, it was deleted by growth. But there is a second layer to this, one that is less biological and more deeply human. Memory is not just about storage, memory is about meaning. And meaning requires language. To remember something as a story, as an experience that happened to you, that you can place in time, that you can narrate to yourself and others, you need what psychologists call a narrative self. A sense that there is a you who experiences things, a you who exists through time, a you with a past and a future. That self does not exist when you are born. It develops slowly, through language, through social interaction, through being told stories about who you are. Around the age of 2, children begin to use words like I and me. Around 3, they start to place themselves in time. They begin to say yesterday and tomorrow. They start to understand that they are a continuous being moving through a world that existed before they arrived and will continue after they leave. Before that moment, experiences happen, but there is no narrator to record them. No self to say, "This happened to me." Researchers Catherine Nelson and Robin Fivish spent decades studying how children develop autobiographical memory. What they found was striking. Children who had parents who talked to them frequently about shared past experiences, who said, "Do you remember when we went to the beach and the waves knocked you over?" developed earlier and richer autobiographical memories than children whose parents rarely discuss the past. Language did not just describe memory, language created it. You did not just experience your childhood, you needed someone to help you turn it into a story. And the story had to come before the memory could stick. This is why there are cultural differences in childhood amnesia. Studies comparing American, Chinese, and Maori adults have found consistent differences in their earliest memories. Maori adults, whose culture places enormous emphasis on oral storytelling and shared collective memory, report earliest memories from significantly younger ages than most Western adults. The self that remembers is shaped by the community that teaches you to remember. You are not a neutral recorder of your own experience. You were taught how to be a person who has a past, and that teaching took years. There is one more piece, one that cuts even deeper. Emotions are stored differently from facts. You can lose the explicit memory of an experience, the where, the when, the who, and still carry its emotional residue for the rest of your life. This is the domain of what researchers call implicit memory, the memory your body keeps when your mind forgets. If something frightened you deeply at age 2, you will not remember it, but your nervous system will. You will feel a vague unease in certain rooms, around certain kinds of people, in certain kinds of silence, and you will have no idea why. The origin is gone. The reaction remains. Joseph Ledoux, a neuroscientist who spent his career mapping the emotional brain, showed that the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, matures far earlier than the hippocampus. It is online, recording, reacting in the first weeks of life. So your earliest experiences do not disappear completely. They sink below the level of language and story, into the body, into the reflex, into the feeling. You cannot remember being held for the first time, but some part of you has never stopped knowing what it felt like. This means that the years you cannot access are not truly lost. They are operating underneath everything. The attachment patterns you formed before you could speak are still running in your adult relationships. The emotional tone of your first home is still coloring your nervous system. The voice of the first person who made you feel safe or unsafe is still alive in the way your body responds to certain kinds of closeness. You are not a person who started at the edge of your earliest memory. You started long before that. In the dark, in the warm, in the noise, before you had a word for any of it. Childhood amnesia is not a failure of the brain. It is evidence of how deeply those years shaped you before you were capable of understanding them. You cannot remember being a child, but your body was there for all of it, and it has been carrying that knowledge ever since, long before you had the language to ask why.